Commence the recording, please. Thank you. Item 1, I'm going to hand over to our scrutiny officer for this item, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This first item is to appoint a chairperson for this year. The chair of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee is to be appointed by the members of the committee from one of the chairpersons of the Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committees. But just to emphasise, it cannot be the chairperson representing the executive group. That leaves us with two options, one of whom was last year's chair, who doesn't want to do it this year. So that leaves us with one person. But the person has to be nominated and seconded by members to begin with before the appointment can be formalised. So, could I invite nominations, please? Councillor Williams?
Can I nominate Councillor Freya Bledsoe, please?
Thank you very much. Anybody second that, please?
Yes, second that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bledsoe, are you prepared to be the chairperson of this committee?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Okay, you're officially appointed the chair of COSC.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So welcome to this Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, which has been convened as a hybrid meeting. The meeting has been recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Everyone participating in the meeting is accessing it either from the Council Chamber, Civic Officers, Angel Street in Bridgend, or from remote locations. Should I, as Chair, experience any technical difficulties during the meeting, it has been agreed that Councillor Penhale Thomas will step in temporarily as Chair. Please, can everyone ensure that mobile phones are switched off or switched to silent mode, please? Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda, and I will ask the officer to present a brief summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Officers and members are reminded to refer to the page numbers contained in the public version of the agenda pack, please. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their microphones on at that point, but I would ask that, with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times you keep your microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference. However, I would invite members and officers to leave their cameras on for the duration of the meeting as agreed at the full council meeting. Whether attending in the chamber or remotely, if any members or officers wish to raise a point or question, they should press hands up icon on the screen at the top right hand side of the Microsoft window. And I will come to you in order that I receive the requests. If you're in the chamber, please switch on the microphone on your desk and speak directly into the mic to allow those who are remote to hear you clearly. Please lower your hand once you have finished speaking. The instant messaging chat button has been disabled for this meeting. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout its duration, and where necessary will mute those that are not being used. I'll ask officers to introduce themselves when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting, and they too should ensure microphones are switched off when not in use. So I will now proceed to the agenda. Just before I do, can I ask members to turn their cameras on, please, online, please, so that we can see you? Thank you. If there's a reason for not being able to turn your camera on, please, can you let me know? No? Okay, thank you. Item 2, apologies for absence. I will now ask the scrutiny officer to announce the apologies for absence received.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Martin Hughes, Councillor Alberini Williams, and Councillor Gary. What is that? Ah.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Tim Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. Not an apologies, but I do have to leave quite sharpish at 12 p.m. due to other council business.
Thank you. Jackie?
Hi, can I just say apologies for Claire Marchant, and I also have to leave by 12:30 for another meeting.
No problem, thank you. Councillor Gebby?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to advise, I need to leave at 12:30 for another appointment. Thank you.
Councillor Blundell, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm in the same boat as some others here. I have to leave about midday-ish for work commitment. Thank you.
No problem, thank you. Councillor Griffiths? Sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I also have to leave at 12:30 for another engagement. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Councillor Spanswick?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Same again, have to leave by 12:30 for another appointment.
Sorry, apologies, I should have called you leader. Sorry. Councillor Davis?
Yeah, same, Chair. I have to leave at 12:30. Thank you.
No problem. Right. We will get through as swift as we can then. Thank you. Declarations of interest, please. If any member has an interest to declare in any matter on the agenda, please click the raise hand icon and I will come to you in turn for your declaration of interest. Councillor Winstanley?
Okay, I have a number of declarations of interest in agendas items 6, 7 and 8 due to my employment with Owen Cultural Trust, which impacts on anything to do with the Grand Pavilion, libraries, my Stake Town Hall. It also means that sometimes in my capacity with the library, I've also supported partnerships with employability and the Food and Fun projects that BCBC run. Obviously, there's a lot of the performance stuff. It involves libraries as well, including offering attractive leisure and cultural activities. I'm closely involved in that. But I've also, as a school governor, very interested in the modernising school buildings and in the Welsh language promotion and expanding of Welsh medium education. I think that's all, but it does impact on all three areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you declaring a personal or prejudicial on those?
Personal.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. Councillor David?
Advice from the Deputy Monitoring Officer this morning, and on that basis, and to be on the safe side and err on the side of caution, I'm going to declare a prejudicial interest on items 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 as former leader and former member of the Cabinet. At least I can stay for item 10 and 11. Well, I could, but I also have to leave at 12:30, so I may not be there for those items. So sincere apologies, Chair.
It's a neat way to get out of the meeting, but well done. No, that's fine.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Thank you very much. I've got a personal interest to declare in items 5, 6 and 7 as Chair of Governors of Coity Primary and a Governor in Bryn Teg, because I have a number of questions that I will be raising on school budgets. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor John Paul Blundell?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This will sort of belay my previous one to say that I'd have to leave the meeting in about midday, as I'll follow the Councillor David's lead of just having received the same advice from the Deputy Monitoring Officer. I will be declaring the prejudicial interest, and it literally has just come in the last minute, in agenda items 5, 6 and 7 and 8. So on that point, I will leave the meeting and no doubt probably not return, sadly.
Yep, not a problem. Thank you, though. Right. All content? Lovely. Let's move on then. Item 5. Oh, sorry, no. Item 4, my apologies. Approval of minutes. Please can I have a mover and a seconder for each set of minutes for the meetings held on? And then we've only got the 21st of March 2024, please.
Yeah, I'll move them.
Yeah.
Sorry, who was the mover?
Me.
Thank you, Tim.
And second.
Who was the second? Sorry.
Simon.
Simon, thank you. Cheers. So Councillor Tim Thomas and Simon Griffiths. Councillor Griffiths. Thank you. Thank you both. Moving on to item 5, revenue budget outturn 2023-24. I'll ask the Chief Officer Finance, Performance and Change to briefly introduce the report. I will then call upon members who indicate they wish to speak by clicking on the raise hand button in turn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to confirm for the sake of the recording that I'm Carys Lord, I'm the Chief Officer for Finance, Housing and Change. So I'll just very briefly introduce this report, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to provide you with an update on the Council's financial revenue performance for the last financial year, which ended on the 31st of March. The approved budget for the year, the net budget for the year was 342 million. The final outturn position is shown for you at Table 1, and it indicates to you an overall outturn of a net overspend of 7.054 million. This is made up of overspends by directorates of 13.8 million, with an underspend on council-wide budgets of 5.2 million. It was a difficult financial year for the council, and it's the first time that Bridgend has reported an overspend at the end of the financial year. I would say that the council is certainly not alone in that position, with all councils in Wales reporting significant budget pressures. There is a lot of information in the report, Chair, so I won't go through it all, other than to say if you look in section 3.3, that's where we go into the detail for each of the main service areas. The financial position was reported throughout the financial year. So the report details for you as well that we had to draw down on earmarked reserves in order to balance the budget. As a council, we have to have a balanced budget at year end. Therefore, we drew down on reserves, and we also took some money from the council fund in order to do that. I would draw your attention to the fact that the final drawdown of revenue reserves last year was 12.1 million, and that is summarised for you in Table 4 of this morning's report. So the financial position is challenging for the council, and I think that's reflected in the figures that you've got in front of you. So, Chair, if I could, I'd just bring your attention to the recommendations in Section 9 of the report, namely that we're asking committee to consider the revenue outturn position for 2023-2024. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go straight to our members, and I believe Councillor Simon Griffiths, you had a question on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess my question is really on overview position of our budgetary process. What I'm concerned at is actually taking combination of the outcome from outturn from last year, I'm looking also at the end of Q1 forecast for the end of this current year. We're not in a significantly different position. My concern is that we went through a very tortuous budget process last year, where we attempted to set a budget which we believed at the time was balanced. But at the end of Q1, we now realise that particular balance that particular budget is already predicted to be overspent by actually more than we overspent by last year. So what I'm really questioning here is whether the budget process we have is sufficiently robust to cope with the extreme situation that we find ourselves in, and whether there is something different that we need to do immediately on two different points. One, which is to set a budget process this year which avoids an immediate overspend next year, because, in other words, not repeating what's happened this time next year. So that's point one. But the second point is to recognising that we are highly unlikely to recover this overspend of 9 million this year, and asking for steps to be taken to identify where that shortfall is going to come from immediately. And there's only one place it can come from, which is our capital reserves, and that actually triggers the question of, okay, so which of the capital reserves should we use for this? My understanding is that we can use capital reserves where those reserves have previously been built up from revenue underspend in previous years. We can actually transfer those to a revenue budget this year if we have a plan to recover a future budget back to be fully balanced. So I'm really questioning the position that we're in and the overall budgetary process. And I'd like to, I think maybe it's a question for Carys about, are we actually doing the same thing this year as we did last year? We're going to end up with the same problem, or is there something more dramatic that we should do? I'm minded here of I'm sorry, I apologize for the length of the question, but I'm minded here of what commercial organisations do in this circumstance, which is they recognise that there is a short-term injection of capital which is required to establish a significant change. And with the outcome of that change over a 2 or 3 year period, resulting in a lowered base budget for certain areas. And I do wonder whether we have to take a much more aggressive role in that sort of approach to transform this position from where we are at the moment. So I apologies for the long question, Chair.
No, that's fine. Caris, are you content with that question? Because there is quite a lot in there to unpack. Thank you.
There was quite a lot. Thank you for the question, though, Councillor Griffiths. I will try and answer it, and if I get to the end and I've missed anything, then obviously please do say. I think we reported the position throughout last year. You've moved slightly into the next agenda item, but linking the two reports, and I think, you know, logically that makes perfect sense to do so. Members will be aware of what our budget setting process is, and at the end of the day we have to balance this budget either by reducing our spend or increasing our income. And for the current financial year, we've done both. We've got significant savings sitting in this year's budget, and we had a high council tax increase as well. I think, are we going to, I think, cut to your last bit of the question really is, so is our process working well? I think there's a couple of things that we plan to do this year to change that process. Now, some of it is around how we manage the position as we go through the year. So you've rightly pointed to the Q1 position, which is showing an overspend as well. We've put in that 5-point action plan, which we mentioned last year, is remaining in place this year. So that's sort of a selective vacancy freeze, no non-essential spend to be made, making sure that we maximise our income opportunities. And really, I think we need to get, and we are doing, getting the message out to everybody, and that's managers, elected members and staff generally, about how serious this financial position is. And with a view to that should reduce some of the spend that we've got. What we are going to do this year, is this all right, Chair? Because I'm conscious I'm cutting into the next agenda item as well. So we've done some briefings. We need to, as I said, keep everybody fully sighted on the position. So we did an all-member briefing this Monday, which I have to say was very well attended. We will continue to do that throughout the year so that all members, whether they sit on Cabinet or they sit on COSC or wherever they sit in the organisation, will have an up-to-date budget position. We are also now putting in additional meetings between Cabinet members and directors, and we will be kicking that in now with the Q1 results to look at the detail in the reports which you've got and having those really difficult discussions about the first point we need to do is try and pull back the spend this year, and having those difficult discussions about what does that look like for them, for their services, and what is the impact of those. And we'll be kicking those off now that the Q1 meetings, the Q1 figures are available. And I'm going to suggest they're going to be very regular meetings throughout this year now. We report to you quarterly, but we will also be doing budget cuts, if you like, at the end of every month to monitor those key budget areas where we've got those pressures and they're already showing through. And again, we'll be having those discussions again with Cabinet members and directors at the end of those months if those positions are not changing. I think the nub of it is about reprioritisation, though. I think the leader has already gone out with a statement with regards to this council needs to change because we cannot afford to run or manage the breadth and depth of services that we are currently delivering. So we are looking at what does that mean for council? What does, you know, a 20% reduction mean to the council, and how are we going to manage that? And is it about either stopping some services completely, or is it about reducing the level of service areas in some areas? And I would suggest it's probably a bit of both. So to go back to that perennial question, is it statutory or non-statutory? If it's non-statutory, do we continue with it? And if we do we do it in a different way? But even if it's statutory, the issue would be, but at what level should we be delivering that service? So I think for all services in the council, it will be a look at, do we continue doing it? Is there a different way that we could do it which may maintain the same outcome but we deliver it in a different way? Can we work with others to deliver it, or in fact could others deliver it for us? So I think that's a big piece of work, Councillor Griffiths, and I think that would just take me to the last bit that you were talking about, which is how do we actually fund that? Now we do have reserves, and I have said before that they cannot be used for a long-term reason to prop up this revenue budget. However, if as a council we are going through a period of significant change, they could be used to smooth that journey as we're making that change. I suppose the one risk I'm just going to flag on that is the comment that I made when I introduced this report, which is that we drew down £12 million last year from reserves in order to balance the budget. We do have reserves in Bridgend. We're lucky that we have reserves, but they're not going to last forever. So if we're going to do that, we're going to have to start that change process quickly and bring about the change as quickly as possible, because our reserves will not last forever. I hope that answers the main issues that you raised, Councillor Griffiths.
I think it does. But if I could have a follow-up, if that's okay, Caris, which is that given the, and I am jumping on the second item here, given the situation with the Q1 outturn and projection for the end of the year, do we have a reasonable expectation of bringing that overspend back to zero? And if we don't, which I suspect is the case, I do not expect, I cannot see us at this point of time getting that back to zero. Where will we fund the overspend from? And if it's the only place it can come is from capital reserves, which means that should we be having a conversation now about which of our earmarked spending that we seek to cancel?
I think my honest answer to you, are we going to bring this budget this year back in on zero? Looking at the current figures that we've got for Q1, I think that's a huge, huge challenge. However, I think all of us have got a responsibility to now look very hard at where we are spending, and we need to do everything we can to pull that budget back. Whether it will come back to zero, I think that's a big ask, but I think fair to say that all my colleagues are working really hard to review their services and to bring that spend down and to look at other options. I think we do have to review our reserves. They were put together at a time when we had money and we were able to say back in the past what our priorities were and what we would like to fund going forward. I think the first area is to go back and look at, right, in the new context within which we're all working, are those still our priorities? And I'd suggest to you that's not just the revenue, but you've already raised it yourself, Councillor Griffiths. It's around our capital programme as well. So there are some schemes in the capital programme that have not yet been contractually committed. We are going back and looking at those and saying, is that still a priority for us? If it isn't, can we release that money? If it is still a priority, is there another way that we could deliver it, which means it's not maybe such a large scheme, so that we can reduce the money? So we are going to have to do that in a planned way during this year, so that we have a position. All of this is going to be predicated on risk. And what risk are we willing to put forward, and what risk are we already all willing to agree is a risk that we're willing to live with and manage?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. I can see that the leader's got his hand up. Amanda, Councillor Williams, are you content for the leader to come in? Just before you do, Councillor Spanswick as well, I intend to allow, because we've got a new cabinet, I'm intending to allow for you to give statements, if you wish, at a later date down the agenda of what your priorities are in your each individual directorates, because a lot of you are new into the role, etc., and certainly we've got the new leader, just to get a political steer on the direction. So I don't know if that's where you were going to go with this, but I've got a little time set aside for you later, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'm not supposed to make a statement. I just want to respond, if I can, to the question, and to add and expand on what Caris have already gone through. And there is lots of change taking place this year to look at how best we can deal with our situation. We can't ignore it. We have to deal with it. But it's not going to change overnight. And there are lots of processes in place now that are taking place. and will continue throughout the month of August. You know, there's still plenty of work on August. It's not a month of recess. We will be behind the scenes. I have to be, myself as leader, be convinced that these processes are going to work. And until I go through many of the meetings are planned, there's been some taking place, but there'll be a lot more planned. And I have to convince myself that they're going to work. That can only happen as we go through the next couple of months. But the one thing is clear to me is that this is the year that we will make those decisions and implement them next year, because many decisions will take some lead-in time. We're aware of the 3-year plan with social services, and some of that is bearing fruit slowly, but there's still an overspend. But there's also an increase in demand, and we can't control the demand. But we will make the decisions this year to implement next year. If this year, if it can be done, but some will take lead-in time because of the consultation. But it's quite clear that our priorities are not there set in stone at the moment, because we cannot set all our priorities until we have a full picture where we are with the capital programme, which we discussed yesterday at Council. And that capital programme undoubtedly will have to be modified and fit with what finances we have available, because it appears the overspend now that's projected, as has been touched on, nigh on impossible to bring back to zero. So there'll be an impact on the capital budget again this year probably, which will make us have to come up with our top priorities for next year for the capital budget, as well as what services will either be modified or stopped. It's clear there's going to be less things this council will do going forward into 25-26, but these next couple of months are crucial as far as myself and the new cabinet deciding our priorities going forward. So I'm not sure whether cabinet members will give you their priorities now, because that's work we're doing now as a team with the officers to see where we are heading into next financial year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think a broad overview would be welcomed at this point, and obviously you can't go into detail. We do appreciate that, but I think because you're a new cabinet, it would be helpful for members of both the committee here and the council as a broader entity to have a general idea of what you envisage, where you're going, that sort of thing. Not to put you on the spot, obviously, but you know, just to get that steer and that idea, because we can hear from the officers all day long in their reports, and we do, you know, we know that we're in dire straits. We do know that, but I think if we're going to work as one council and as committees, we're going to help you as the cabinet, which is what we are here to do. We are not here to hinder, we're here to help, and we do need to work together. Then we do need to have a little bit of direction as to where you're going, because you are new into the role. So that's the intention for that. Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had some things that I raised in the pre-meet, but I didn't want to raise those here now. I'll raise them shortly because I've got some questions on the report itself first. So it's back to the reserves, and I wondered, I've got a few questions on that. So Caris, one of the questions was, are we going to draw down on reserves this year? Caris has said that this most likely we will have to. So unless we have we find these significant savings, or we have this additional funding, I think we're going to be facing the problem year on year that we are going to be eating into our reserves. So my questions from here are, how much reserves have we got that could be used for revenue spend? And also, how long did it take for us to build up those reserves in the first place? Because once we spend them, we've got to then find them again in future years to build that pot back up, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And you are right. We will probably have to pull down on some of our reserves this year if we can't bring this budget back. I think you've raised a very important point, which is that we do have reserves, and you can see them there. They're detailed for you, Appendix 4 of today's report. They've taken many, many years to build up. We were lucky in the previous couple of financial years. We had a lot of money because we had a lot of support from Welsh Government due to COVID. And as a result of that, we had significant underspends, and we were able to boost our reserves significantly in that period. But actually, the reserves that you see in front of you have been built up over a long period of time. And I think, and probably I should have said when I introduced the report, that because of our financial outturn position, we haven't added to reserves at all at the end of the last financial year. All we've done is taken away. So we can go through all of these reserves, Councillor Williams, and we would have to, as I said earlier, we're going to have to make a decision with regards to priorities. And some of them have been labelled as capital reserves, but actually that was a decision that we made. They were originally put together via revenue contributions, and we can reclassify them as revenue if we need to. So we do have that flexibility. But it is a trawl, really, of going through all of these reserves and determining what it is they're doing. Is that risk still there? Do we still think that is something that we need to fund, or can we reallocate them and reprioritise them?
Are you content with that, Councillor Williams?
Yes. So what we're saying is that all of the capital reserves can be used for revenue, because that was my question. How much of it can be used? Because obviously there's a significant figure there, but I was under the impression that only some of it could be used for revenue. So there is a smaller pot actually of reserves that we can use. And then you said about many years. Are we talking 10 years? Are we talking the next couple of years? Do we foresee we might be able to put some money back into the pot? Yeah, thanks.
One thing we need to be mindful is this is a position statement of the reserves at the end of the financial year, particularly the capital reserves. Many of them are already committed within the capital programme. So the programme that was discussed at Council last night broke down how we're funding that programme, and there is an element for capital for reserves. So, I mean, what we could do is provide, if it would help, that appendix that you've got there of those reserves in the capital ones, how many of them are already committed into schemes. And actually, when you look at the capital monies that we've got available and not committed, we've only got about £2 or £3 million of capital reserves that are uncommitted. Now, I will just caveat that to say some of them may be committed against schemes that have yet to come online, and those are the ones that I'm saying we need to go back and have a look to see whether or not they remain priorities, and if they're not, we can release that funding. But I think it might be helpful if we provided for you in those capital receipts those that are contractually committed and therefore they're not available for us to reprioritise. And I think you also raised there, Councillor Williams, about whether we will be able to put money into reserves in the coming years. My honest answer to you at the moment, on the basis of the financial modelling we've got, is I think that's unlikely. And I wouldn't be advising that we're making plans as to how we could use those reserves, because I can't guarantee for you that we will be able to put money into reserves for the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you. Are you content with that, Councillor Williams?
Yes, thank you.
No worries, thank you. Moving on to Councillor Penhale-Thomas, but before I do, Councillor Granville, Councillor Spanswick, can I just ask you not to do the sidebar, because we can hear you down here, it's quite distracting. Thank you. Cheers. Councillor Penhale-Thomas.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, really pleased that Councillor Griffiths and Councillor Amanda Williams have focused on reserves today. I share their concerns, and from the sounds of it, Caris, you do too, in so much as we know that reserves are literally one-time wonders. There is an enormous misconception among members of the public that this authority is sitting on tens of millions of pounds in reserves, while in Councillor Spanswick, so as Councillor Spanswick was saying, we are cutting services and we'll need to look boldly at what we deliver. That is absolutely not the case. And as Councillor Spanswick and Councillor Paul Davis know, we were at a public meeting last week where one member of the public was very misconceived in what this council has to spend on revenue. I'm deeply concerned that we are dipping into this one-time wonder of reserves to better support our revenue budget. And I just want to turn to the council fund. So that stands at 9.73 million. It's dipped from 4.84% of the budget down to 4.3%. And there's been a drawdown of £102,000 in the last financial year to support the revenue budget at year end to the 31st of March. Caris, aside from supporting the revenue budget, which is absolutely not what we want to do, what would be a legitimate use of the of the council fund? Are you concerned that we may be dipping into that further, where it should be sitting at that 5% mark? And I suppose, depending on the answer, is it your intention, is it the Cabinet's intention to be particularly protective of that fund, given that we should be sitting at that 5% mark? What would we ordinarily be dipping into the council fund for, were it not for supporting the revenue budget at the 31st of March? Thanks, Chair.
No, thank you for that question, and that's a very interesting point, really, and I think you're right to ask for clarification on it. So the council fund is really like our, what would you call it, like our contingency fund. It's not allocated to anything in particular. It's to help us with our cash flow. So if something untoward happens during the year, we've got some money there that we can help to manage our cash flow as we move through the year. Now, what I've argued in the past is it had already dipped below the 5%. And when asked that question at council, I'd said, I'm comfortable with it going below that 5% on the basis that actually we do have a lot of reserves. We've been very prudent in our financial management, and we've put aside reserves to meet issues and priorities that we want to meet. You know, our forward planning is such that we've covered what we think are our risks and priorities going forward. And therefore, to dip below that 5% isn't causing me too much concern. Things can change, can't they, really? And it's dipped again. And at one point during closing, we were talking about taking more than that money out of the council fund. And I'm afraid I had to intervene and say, I'm uncomfortable with that now. And therefore, we had to release more money from reserves. The reason for me being uncomfortable is we don't have that body of reserves now that we had maybe 2 years ago. And look into the future, how are we going to have to use those reserves? So certainly, you asked, are we protective of that fund? I think my honest answer would be to you that we shouldn't be we should be protecting that fund going forward. We're below that 5% now, as you rightly said, and my view is it certainly shouldn't drop further. And therefore, I wouldn't be looking to that fund as a way of supporting the revenue budget in any way going forward.
Thank you. Just to come in on this as well, Caris, because it's about how comfortable you feel about the situation where we are, and how concerned you are going forward on that. Because I have figures here about the usable revenue reserves, and then about the savings that we have to make, and they come very close to each other, if I'm honest. Are we concerned about that?
I think your question, how comfortable am I with where we are now? I don't like bringing a report to you, reporting to you that level of outturn, and I doubt that any Section 151 officer would be comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
I think for me, we do have reserves. So, you know, I don't want to scaremonger. We do have reserves, and we are in a position where we can make decisions about those reserves. But I think for me, and it's already been touched on this morning, and the leader has repeated it, we need to have clear priorities moving forward. And that will, and that can help us to focus the budget, and it can help all of us to focus on what this council will look like in 12 or 18 months' time. And those priorities really will drive all of that. And I think once we have those, and you know, I think we all have to be honest and say, when we have those priorities, there will be difficult decisions to come from those priorities, because we don't have the budget to continue to provide everything that we're providing today. So I'm not comfortable bringing you this report. However, you know, I think we are in a position where we can make some of those important decisions, and we can reshape this, and we can make sure that the budget and the service requirements marry together.
So basically, we are in very different waters than we were even just 12 months ago, and it is sobering, and the public need to be aware that we are within these very different waters, I think, from where we were not even 12 months, 6 months ago. Is that correct?
I think we were promised at one stage that we would have, for instance, 3-year settlements from Welsh Government, which would help us to plan. Due to the kind of cost of living crisis and everything else, that hasn't been possible, and we're still going to have a late settlement this year for all the obvious reasons that people know about. But that does mean the predictions that we've got for funding going forward are that we're looking at a cash flat settlement from Welsh Government, and so far there's nothing to suggest that that's going to change. So I think, yes, we were hopeful that things would improve, we'd be able to do more longer term planning. That doesn't look possible at the moment.
Thank you, but no thank you. It's the honest truth on that. Councillor Griffiths. Sorry, you're on mute.
So I try to be a good citizen and knock it off when I can, and then I forget. Before I go into the question, just to comment on Caris's words there. We talk about cash flat. What it means is a 3% real terms reduction, which means a 3% additional decrease next year in what we are able to provide as a council. So I just want to note that. What I want to come on to is we've talked here about having to use our reserves, and very likely use our reserves and draw down on those. What I would like to ask is, have we already put a hold on any commitment to spend our capital at this point in time? My feeling is that we should be not committing to any new projects, and any projects which are not already fully contracted, we should be putting a hold on that spend, and we should even be considering cancelling some of the contracts that we should be looking at contracts to see what the penalties are on them. So my question is, should we have a moratorium at this point on all capital expenditure until we've completed this review and we know which of those projects should proceed and not proceed? And I'm doing this on the basis of human nature. If I was a service manager inside a directorate at the moment with a capital spend, I would be trying to spend it as madly as I possibly could immediately before I'm stopped spending it in the future. So I just want to preempt that behaviour and say, actually, we as officers should not be, or so you as officers should not be signing off any capital expenditure without that going fully up the chain.
Councillor Griffiths, I think you raise a very good point there, but I think as well, sorry to just jump in, this comes under the 5-point action plan, which we've got already in place, which is the freeze on spending that isn't required. But I understand that your question goes slightly further in that, are we going to draw back on projects, I think is the question, isn't it?
I think the action plan is focused on revenue. I'm talking to you about capital expenditure, which I'm not sure whether it's included in that action plan.
No worries, thank you. Caris.
When Council approved the capital budget for this year back in February, no new schemes were included there because we were taking the time to close the accounts, but also to be able to plan what we would spend the money on. Now, ordinarily, when you saw the Q1 report, which you did last night at Council, at that point we would have been putting in schemes, new schemes, having gone through the requirements that we have to get a scheme into the capital programme, been asking you to consider new schemes. We didn't do that yesterday on the basis that capital funding is very tight. So really reflecting back what you've said, Councillor Griffiths, is that we know that we have pressures within the existing programme. We also know that we don't have a lot of spare capital monies. Therefore, we're currently going through a process of reviewing. Directors are being asked to put forward areas of capital spend that they would like to see funded, but we're all very aware that we've got nowhere near the same amount of money as they're going to be asking us for. So there are no new capital schemes, unless, I will caveat that, unless we're getting grant funding. And we are able to support the schemes within that grant funding. But at the current time, there's no new capital spend going, and we're going to be reviewing that now. And I think we said yesterday that we'd be coming back to Council in sometime in the autumn with the outcome of that review and as to whether or not we will be able to commit any new capital monies this year.
I'm just going a little bit further than Caris, if possible, which is we have that capital programme, but that capital programme itself, from my perspective, should be put on hold for the moment until it's been reviewed, rather than it's basically an open door at the moment, so that if it's in that list of authorised projects as of last February, it can be spent. I'm just suggesting that, and it may need to go to full council for this, that we actually suspend that programme for the moment.
Sorry, Chair, is it all right if I come back?
Yes, and I'm going to bring Councillor Gebbie in after you as well, please. If you still want to come in, yes.
Okay, I think my response would be that, I mean, there are a large number of the schemes in that capital programme are already contractually committed and are already underway. And equally, a number of them are grant funded and there are timelines attached to those. So if we don't complete them within a timeline, we will lose money. So all of those are continuing. So I think we are doing this review of all of those that are not contractually committed, and we will be keeping a close eye on those that are as well, because they have to come in within budget, because we don't have any additional allocation to fund any overspends in the capital programme.
Thank you. Councillor Gebbie?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Councillor Griffiths. I don't disagree with your contribution either. I would hesitate to put a complete moratorium on it. One of those reasons is I'm aware we've just made a business case to the Housing with Care Fund for Children's. It's a spend to save. Essentially, we're asking them to support us in building two new children's homes that we are not going to contribute to the build of. I think that's really important, that we don't lose the opportunity to access these funds. And as you're all aware, particularly in this committee, because I'm aware that most of them sit on Scrutiny too as well with me, what I would say is you're aware of the difficulties that we face, and you're also aware of the expenditure in relation to children's residential. You know, one placement can put us over budget without even thinking about it. And our base budget for children's, as it is evidenced in the report, we only actually have 6 to 8 children's placements that we are funded for a year as a service. And when you consider we've got 20 at the minute, that's in excessive, it's more than double. We do need to consider how we're delivering, and we certainly don't want it with independent providers that realistically quite often have taken the mickey since Welsh Government implemented the not-for-profit in children's services. So I'm hesitant to put a complete moratorium on it, but fully understand and appreciate your comments. Thanks very much, Chair.
So moratorium with caveats potentially. Councillor Gebbie. Yeah. Okay.
If I could just, I'm listening to the responses there, Chair. I think the good responses. I think this is about making sure that the decisions are made at a high enough level that it looks at it from an all council perspective. And Councillor Gebbie's made a very good case for a spend to save. And I would much prefer the money to go there than onto something which is a lost capital. In other words, it doesn't really give us a short-term revenue boost. So I think it's trying to make sure that these decisions are made at the appropriate level and less use of delegated powers. And I know that's something that we also need to look at around whether officers within services can make decisions without actually full visibility by CMB or Cabinet.
Thank you. Chief Exec?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I may be able to help a little bit here. I fully understand the point Councillor Griffiths is making, and I don't disagree with the principle, but I suppose my warning would be let's not grind the organisation to a halt here. A lot of capital expenditure is allocated annually to things like DFGs, roadworks, repairs, street repairs, high repairs, health and safety. So I take the point entirely, but actually there does need to be a mechanism to spend capital money on a regular basis from those annual allocations. I think there's a stronger case where there's a specific scheme to determine whether that's still a priority in the way that Caris has described, and we're doing that on an ongoing basis. But I think there is a balance here, otherwise we're simply going to have unintended consequences of a moratorium. So I understand entirely the point that's being made, and I think maybe we need to look at how we control that, but there are an awful lot of capital expenditure is allocated deliberately so to a level that can be spent effectively within the time frame of the year, and I think if we didn't do it, we'd have probably bigger issues.
Many thanks, Chair, for your forbearance and giving me that time.
1 second, Councillor Griffiths. No, I do tend to agree that it is a delicate balance, I agree with Councillor Griffiths, though, that potentially where we're at the moment, we're not quite going far enough. But I do agree, because obviously we've had plenty of warnings as well. We had the member briefing just recently, which wasn't pleasant to sit through, I'll be honest. And I don't want us to get to a Section 114 situation. And I think that we do have to take fairly drastic action now in order to avoid that. But at what level do we do that? And I think we do need to find that balance. And I do think that Council is here and the committees are here to support the Cabinet and the officers in doing that. And I think we do need to find that right balance. And Councillor Griffiths is right there in some measure, but equally as well, I do take on board what you say, Chief Executive. So with that, I am going to move to Councillor Williams, please.
Thank you very much. And I was coming in to expand on what Councillor Griffiths was saying, and I agree with what he's suggesting. There are certain projects that have been long-term projects. I've been a councillor since 2017, and they've been on the capital programme since then and haven't progressed. So I think those sorts of projects we need to be looking at. We keep coming back to Waterton as an example. We need to be looking at these projects. However, I have concerns when it comes to some of our schools. We've got a number of schools that are on the capital programme. And the further down the line we put those off, the more it's going to cost us. So there will be rising costs and our budgets are not rising. So we need to make sure we're dealing with those as quickly as possible, because things like Herons Bridge, we're in desperate need of a new Herons Bridge, because that could have cost savings then, because we're taking all of our children to the school in our borough. So I think we need to prioritise some of those areas, but we do need to look at some of the long-term projects that haven't been progressing as well. So my question on that was about the schools, and if we're confident that we're going to be able to deliver all of those schools within the timescales, or whether those will have to come out of there and we'll have to use that money elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Just before we progress on that, I'm just going to make a declaration that I am a governor at Herons Bridge. So I'll make a personal declaration on that, please. Who would like to take that? Councillor Gebby?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's just worth, so I'll declare a personal interest. I'm Chair of Governors at Mynydd Cymvig. It is on the capital scheme. However, what I would say is we've already had conversations around schools. I'm very conscious of delays and slippage in relation to my own school, and I think I'll use that just as an example, because we're not making any decisions, so it's not prejudicial. And the reason that I'm saying that is because NRW was so delayed in even as attaining our licences. So we know that there is going to be slippage across the board in various capital schemes, however we plan it. For councillors that have been here for a while, and even those that have only been elected for 2 years, actually they've seen slippage over capital projects over the years. That's not necessarily down to us. Sometimes that's outside influences. So I think we just need to keep it on the radar. I do think we need that further discussion, but I think it's something that we're not going to be able to resolve and give you an indication of how that's going to be resolved today here in Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Chair. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Lindsay, can I bring you in, please?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Williams, for the question. First of all, just to assure all members of this committee, we, as I mentioned in Council yesterday, we are trying hard to accelerate all these schemes. I'll just touch upon very briefly why there's been slippage in some of these schemes. First of all, you can imagine schemes of this size, we are looking at around £70 million of investment here coming from Welsh Government, the local authority in Section 106. So a significant amount of funding has been applied to this programme, and this is a 7-year programme, so it will be over that period. The other issue that we've had is, of course, that we still wait in some cases for consent from Welsh Government to proceed with these projects. We wait for some of the design processes to be completed, some of the planning processes completed, and on occasion we've had ecological issues in some of these sites that are obviously held up progress here. Now, currently, all the sites we are looking to progress. Councillor Griffiths made a really good point earlier with regard to having a really good look at all of these. But I think the key thing for us is, and I think all of us will be minded here, is that they are, in the main, invest to save Councillor Amanda Williams raises a really good point around Herons Bridge. Of course, we want to make sure that most of our learners are educated within this county. It saves on costs. You'll see in the revenue pressures that learners go outside county, so that is an imperative for us to move forward. There are also health and safety requirements, progress schemes. Mynydd Cymfic Primary School is one of those, and also the statutory duty to meet demand, and all of the schemes are aligned with our LDP. So again, just assurance, colleagues and elected members, we are progressing these as timely as possible within the restraints that we find ourselves in.
Thank you. Does that answer the question for you, Councillor Williams?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Lindsay, just before you disappear as well, are you content as the director that actually these slippages that we're seeing, we're not going to fall behind the curve? So with Herons Bridge, I'm aware that actually we're fully at capacity. In fact, we're over at capacity where we are now. And when we move to the new building, we will be at capacity once more, just about, when it's built. But if we're behind now on the building of this, are we content that where we're heading is going to be sufficient, or are you concerned about that, and do we need to look at that and plan for that as well, not just for Herons Bridge but for all our schools? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's a really good question. When we look at future demand, obviously, it's very difficult to look into the extreme future. We do work with planners. We do look at demand that's coming through the system to try and project it, and ultimately we rely heavily on experts, for example, within the Educational Psychology Service and learner support to establish where the demand is coming from birth all the way through. So we're reasonably content for the next, short-term period that we'll meet this demand, and we will reduce the cost of learners going outside county. But looking further ahead, one of the challenges we do see is, of course, Herons Bridge, YBC and the Bridge are very well regarded schools, and there's significant demand for them. You will be aware we've had recent ESTIN inspections of at least one of those schools, which was outstanding. And again, that creates demand as well. So it's a good position to be in. But again, I think the new build will create that short to medium term increase in places. Clearly, if we need to increase the capacity again, we need to look at that in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Penhale-Thomas? I think your mic's still on.
Sorry, Chair, did you just call me in?
Yes, I did, yes.
Sorry, my internet went just ever so slightly dodgy then. Thanks so much. If I could just come back and make some observations on Caris's contribution to my question earlier, and then a couple more questions. So I think to a certain degree, Chair, from what I've heard today, we are relatively victims of our own success in actually being pretty prudent with building up those reserves. And in actual fact, we are lucky that we have them to be able to dip into them, much as it goes against the grain, really, in terms of supporting the revenue budget. I'm heartened, or as heartened as I can be, given the challenging circumstances that we face, that we have an S151 and Chief Finance Officer sat at the top table, willing to have those conversations that are of an uncomfortable nature, to say, actually, no, we can't dip into this fund, because I accept Councillor Griffiths' point. If I were Janine, if I were Lindsay, if I were Claire, I would be at that table banging the drum for additional financing for my services, wherever that comes from, to avoid further service cuts. So I'm actually in agreement with Caris, as well as the directors, to be in that position where that conversation can be had. So I'm quite heartened to hear that. On capital expenditure versus revenue, it's an unusual conversation, isn't it? Because the two can't be separated, but they are very separate programs of work in their own right. Revenue is service delivery on an everyday basis. Capital is that ambitious program of exciting projects, really. But they are two very separate programs of work. So in essence, if we are to have a moratorium on capital projects, we can't necessarily be in a position to be dipping into what we don't do to plug a gap in continued revenue and service delivery. But I just want to focus on no new capital spend, Caris. Does that still give us the opportunity to via within the capital programme? I'm thinking of one capital project in my mind, which I won't reveal right now, but I do hope that there's still the opportunity to via from projects within the existing capital programme. I'd be interested to see what a moratorium would bring about. What would we do with the capital that we don't spend? Because you could imagine a scenario whereby there are X number of projects which may, figure off the top of my head, may amount to if those projects are dead in the water and we decide that at some point throughout this financial year, what is it we do with that capital spend? Because I'm not sure if we'd want to be in a position where we continue to use that great ongoing everyday revenue services, because we could be in a position in 2 or 3 years' time where all that money's gone and we're back in exactly the same position. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Caris.
Thank you for that question. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because what we brought to you was the outturn report for the revenue position for last year. We spent a lot of time talking about capital, but you're actually right, Councillor Thomas, is it's becoming more and more difficult to separate them because there are pressures in both budgets, and a decision in one can impact on the other. So it is quite difficult. I think, to be honest, I think what I would tell you is that if we have a capital scheme that either isn't going to run, we decide it's no longer a priority, or the budget that we have allocated for it is not 100% needed, I think my line would be we're going to pull that money back centrally and then review what the priorities are for the council. So it may be another capital scheme, it may well be, but actually we need to make that decision based against those priorities which we've already talked about. What are they and what do we need to do to get there? And also risk, because the capital programme in many areas is covering risk for us as well. So I think any money that comes back, I wouldn't necessarily say we'll take it out of capital, but we need to look then in the total of the capital programme with regards to what we would need to do with that. Does that answer your question, Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, it does. But if we can just go back to the environment, so it seems quite clear that there will be no new capital spend. And obviously, yesterday was one of those strange council meetings. Is the already existing stuff environments. So is it the intention that we would, where possible, where appropriate, where necessary, we would continue to via in and out of capital budgets?
I think the one thing I should have said is it will depend on how a scheme is funded as well. So if it's funded via borrowing, we can't use that borrowing to support the revenue account. If it's funded via capital receipt, there are rules. I cannot use money that are in a capital receipt to fund revenue. So the flexibility we would have would be around whether or not there's any reserve funding in there. But it would have to be dealt with on a scheme by scheme and a priority basis, I would suggest.
Are you content with that?
Yeah, that's grand, and sorry for concentrating on capital so much. I was meant to be talking about revenue.
No, that's fine. That's not a problem. Caris, can I ask you to send me a note as well to clarify what those rules are as well? Is that okay? Do you mind doing that? Right, thank you. Cheers. And with that, and I can see no more hands, I am going to proceed to the next item on the agenda, which has the same invitees who were invited for this report. So if I can ask you to remain, please. Item 6, budget monitoring, Q1 forecast revenue. I'll ask the Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change to briefly introduce the report. Then I will call on members who wish to indicate that they wish to speak by clicking on the raised hand icon in turn, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this report is bringing us forward into the current financial year and giving you an update on our financial position at the end of June and what we predict that may mean for the rest of the year. So our net revenue budget for this year is £360.6 million, and the budget and projected outturn for the current financial year is shown for you at Table 1 of this morning's report. Based on current spend and predictions, the table outlines a projected net overspend of £9.2 million this year. Again, it's split, so for directorates it's anticipated an £11 million overspend, whilst there's a £1.9 million underspend predicted on our council-wide budgets. There's a lot of detail again in this report, Chair, telling you what we're anticipating with regards to the particular issues in particular service areas. I think the one comment that I would make, members will remember that when we set this year's budget, we went at risk with regards to funding for teachers' pension costs. And as with every other authority saying, this had always previously been funded by Welsh Government. Just to update you on that, I think we are going to get money for the teachers' pensions. The quantum of that is yet to be finalised. And due to the general election, we're now not anticipating absolute clarity on that until the autumn. So there is still a level of risk in the budget in relation to that. But I think we will get some money. I think it's the quantum that we're going to get is just up for clarification. So I think there is a lot of detail in the report, starting at section 3.3, line by line for the summaries for you. I think the one thing I would add maybe is that this remains a concerning position, and I probably outlined, and so I think a reasonable question is, and so what are we going to do about that? I think I've outlined that the 5-point action plan remains in place for this year, that we're going to have meetings taking place between senior management and cabinet members, looking at the details that's in this report and having those difficult discussions with regards to how and why we can change that. And I think the briefing that we did for members on Monday, we've had feedback with regards, it was a difficult message for people to receive, but members want to receive that message. They want to know where we are. So I think we will continue the general briefings for members as well as we go through the year. And so, Chair, I just refer you to the recommendations in section 9 where we're asking you to consider the position at the end of Q1.
Thank you, Caris. Just before we continue as well, there was some pinging going off there. I don't know if somebody's got their phone on, but if we can just make sure that phones are switched off, please, as a courtesy. Thank you. Councillor Williams, I think I had you with some questions first. Thank you.
Sorry, are you talking about my questions on this?
Sorry, yes.
Right, okay. Yeah, I had a number of questions on this report. Sorry, I was just finding the right pages for them. So I have questions with regards to the schools' budgets, first of all, because this report sets out that 75% of schools are in a deficit. And I think that figure is just over £5 million. So my first question I had on this, because I've raised concerns, and Lindsay will know I've raised this a number of times before, is that money, whilst it's off our books in BCBC and moved to another sheet of paper, that money is still owed. That is still real money. It's just been moved to another piece of paper. So whilst we've got in that report, it says about financial schemes for schools and the requirement for schools to set balanced budgets or a deficit recovery plan that needs to be approved. Being on two governing bodies that have set deficit recovery plans, they're not going, that we know, are not going to be achieved with ongoing perceived cuts as well. It's certainly not going to be achieved over the 5 years. Potentially then that money could come, that the control of that school could go back to the local authority. Now, if 75% of schools at the moment are in a deficit, the local authority cannot and won't have the resources to deal with all of that. So my first thing is, why are we not showing this as a potential? We're saying it's a green that we've saved all of this, but we haven't actually saved it because these schools haven't recovered that money yet. They might have a plan, but not all of these plans are going to achieve a recovery over the 5 years. So that's the first question.
Okay, would you like to take that, Gareth?
Yes, I'm happy to take that, and I'm sure my colleague, the Director of Education, will come in as well on this one. You're right, Councillor Williams, that we have a high number of the schools who are currently putting budget deficit plans together. We have received most of them, and I know that Lindsay and I have had discussions about them. There are schools who put plans forward who will bring that deficit back. We acknowledge that for some it's over a few years, but there's a lot of work going on to bring those back. We've had some plans, which I will be honest, we've sent back to the schools to ask them to look at again, just to make sure that they've covered all areas that we think that they should be. and we're not currently in a position to be able to say which ones are definitely in the position where they're not going to recover that deficit. But we are, I know Lindsay and his colleagues in his director are having those difficult decisions or discussions with schools to make sure that all opportunities, or maybe opportunities is the wrong word, all options that they've got to bring that spend down, that they are looking at as hard as they possibly can. And ultimately, if there are schools that cannot do that, we are going to have detailed conversations with those schools as the next stage in our process.
Thank you. Leader, did you want to say something on this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, yeah, it was quite concerning to hear that if there are schools that have got a 5-year plan that's not going to work, that's clearly not acceptable. They have to take action to make it work, the same as this authority is taking action and posts are being lost because the funds and the money is not there. So schools have to take, not action we want them to take, but they have to take action and reduce their costs accordingly to fit the budget that's available. The budget has been cut, and it looks like going forward it'll be cut further. That is the reality of the world we're living in, and they have to take action.
Thank you for that. Lindsay, did you want to come in on this, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Councillor Williams for the question, and also thank Councillor Williams as Chair of Governors and all the other governors in this meeting for all the work they do with those schools. We do appreciate it's a particularly challenging period, and we're most grateful for all the governors who work so hard with those schools to work with head teachers to set the budget. So Councillor Williams is right. It says in the report around 3/4 of our schools are projecting this deficit budget. It totals just over £5 million at present. With regard to the overall number of schools who have not yet set a balanced budget, or been agreed, I should say, there are 7 schools out of our 59 schools who have not as yet had their budget agreed. By law, schools must set a balanced budget within 3 years or extend with the circumstances agreed by myself and Caris as the Section 151 officer for 5 years. So currently we only have 7 schools where their budget has not been agreed for that period. As the leaders quite rightly said, all the schools obviously must set a balanced budget, and we'll work with schools extensively to make sure they do that. It's going to be very, very difficult. I've met with head teachers, as Caris has indicated, on several times to discuss this. We've also run training sessions with governors, looking at budgets in particular. And again, I'm indebted to Judith Tutson and her team for providing training on this to governors. Chair, I think one of the challenges we're going to have going forward is looking at some questions and going into the granularity of school budgets that we haven't got into before. We're asking some very difficult questions of schools, and very recently we set a set of questions to all head teachers and governors to look at, and whether it is possible to look at particular ways of saving money. This is going to be challenging, but again, it's something we are committed to, and again, there's a legal reason why we must do this over the next 3 to 5 years. But it would be not correct to me to say this is not going to be challenging, because it is.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, did you want to come back on that at all?
Yes, because I had a number of questions, and I think one of them followed on from Councillor Simon Griffiths' point about some of the committees that are there for social services and for schools. But on that basis, I mean, I know, speaking from personal experience, that the difficulty is if you've got somebody looking at a budget with a finance hat on, they're looking at it with a finance hat on, not the legalities of what's required to run a school. And the example I gave in our pre-meeting was that one of the things that was suggested to COITI was when we had a member of staff who said they would like to trial a year of working 3 days a week, finance said, yeah, you can save now 2 days a week of a teacher. Well, no, you can't, because you still have to have a teacher in a classroom of 30 children. You can't send those children in for 2 days a week with no teacher at all. So there isn't a save in there, because you've still got to recruit to the other 2 days. And it's having that expert knowledge. And I've said in the pre-meet, and I've said numerous times, I'm concerned because it's governing bodies who have to make these decisions. It's governing bodies who agree the budgets. It's governing bodies who agree the deficit recovery plan. We have some very good governors. We have some very good chairs of governors. We have some strong governing bodies. We also have a lot of new governors who don't understand everything. And so whilst training will help, I think more needs to be done for them to be able to manage some of these budgets and to know what they are agreeing and what they're not agreeing. And I do think we need to have some experts on that panel. You need to have head teachers, those who have been in the role of head teacher, advising schools on what can and can't be done, because I don't think we've got the right mix of people supporting our schools at the moment. They need to be people who've been in that role and know exactly what can and can't be done. Otherwise, I fear you'll end up with some schools who will make some decisions and agree some deficit recovery budgets that really don't protect the pupils and don't comply with statutory requirements in schools. So I think there's a lot of work needs doing in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay, did you want to come back?
Thanks, Chair. Again, thanks, Councillor Williams. Councillor Williams is correct. Obviously, there's a need for ongoing support. All schools have an improvement part. They are vastly experienced head teachers that support the schools with obviously the management of a school, which includes governance and financial management. In addition to that, the decisions with regard to deficit budget recovery plans are made by myself. And again, I am a very experienced educationalist, and Caris is Section 151. So we would look at it, as Councillor Williams quite rightly says, through different lenses. We'd look at it from a finance point of view, we'd look at it from a legal point of view, and Councillor Williams is absolutely right. There are statutory requirements with regard to schools and the number of staff or the qualifications of staff that are in front of certain learners. So again, all of that is taken into consideration. What we would do then, we would test the deficit recovery plans that are proposed by governing bodies, and at that stage we would either sign them off or then go back to the schools and work with them further then to refine them. So hopefully that answers Councillor Williams' question. And again, I'm grateful for it.
Thank you. All content, Councillor Williams?
Sorry, managing different screens. I'll come back to all of this in our recommendations if that's okay.
That's fine, that's not a problem. Councillor Penhale-Thomas?
Yeah, diolch, Chair. At the risk of slightly repeating myself, after yesterday's questions in Council regarding this, I just want to concentrate quickly on social services and the outturn for the last quarter. So we are looking at a significant overspend. I just managed to look at what we were looking at this time last year. So actually really pleasing to see it's down significantly. So we were looking at children's social care last year, this time 6.9 million, and we're 3.4. So that's great. There's a bit of a difference in prevention and wellbeing. So there was an underspend last year. There's a slight overspend. It's only 4.33%. But with adult social care last year, we were 4.3, and we're looking at 2.3 this year. So we are heading very much in the right direction. We know we've got the children's plan, which was baked into the budget that we set earlier in February. We know from sitting on social services scrutiny committee, there's an adult social care plan, and alongside some other members of this committee, we sit on the social services and wellbeing improvement board. So there is a tremendous amount of work going on behind the scenes. So I want to commend that. But I just want to go back to my question yesterday, which is there is an element, a significant element in social services of crystal ball gazing in setting a budget today and really not knowing, in particular in children's social care, who's going to come through the front door tomorrow and what it's going to do to your budget. So I wonder, given the children's social services plan, and if you take into account the whole of the directorate, the adult social care plan and the social services and improvement wellbeing board, at what point do you think that these items brought together will be having a major impact on the budget? I can already see it working because the figures from last year compared to this year are much reduced. But at what point, perhaps the director or the cabinet member, at what point do you really think these plans will come into their own? So we're having a conversation here and in council at a budget that looks a lot more balanced in this directorate then. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gebbie indicated that she would like to come in, so I'll bring her in.
Claire's given her apologies for today's meeting. She actually starts her annual leave today, so I'm really pleased. Thank you for your kind comments about social services. That really is down to the work of the staff there. And I want to say the stability of the workforce. You'll be aware that we were reliant on agency workforce. We're in a much better position now, as the report indicates. I think the other thing that I would say is we're moving at a swifter pace. So you will see rapid changes. They won't happen overnight because otherwise it won't be safe to all those people that we're dealing with. And you are right in so much as we need to deal with whatever comes through the front door. We are in a position where we're, part of this conversation that we're having with the public, when we talk about our finances with the public, you've heard this discussion, we're going out, we want to have that budget discussion, we want it to be informed, we want it to be honest, because if we don't have that honest conversation with our residents, they're not in a position to help us. But I want to say we need to go back to old style community values. We know that here in the Welsh Valleys, that during COVID, everybody pulled their socks up and they got on with it because we were all supporting each other. And that's very old school way of working in communities. If your next door neighbour needed a meal, you didn't have a service to provide it. Your next door neighbour who was capable and normally had a young family and was running around, the example is my children used to do my rubbish for my neighbour. I used to cook his food. He grew a lot of vegetables and I used to get some. And I do think we need to go back to strengthening what they can do for themselves and with us supporting them for anything that they can't absolutely do. And we need to be very, very, I don't want to say strict because that's the wrong word. We will always do the right thing, but I think we need to be robust in those discussions. You can see the improvements in children's already. We have a similar piece of work going on in adults, and I'll hand over to Jackie in a minute and she'll be able to give you a bit more of a further in-depth contribution. But it's going to take 1.5 years, 2 years at least, because otherwise it's not going to be safe. You heard me talk earlier about a business case that's gone in for children's for an additional 2 homes. You will be aware, councillor yourself, as you sit on the improvement board with us, that actually this is going to save us money longer term. Yes, there is still a revenue implication, but actually the spend that we have on independent placements is so significant, just one placement can put us over budget. And it's actually the same in adults as well. So if we can get into this place where it doesn't matter what you need from us in social services, be that adults, children's, learning disabilities, mental health, whatever it is, we need to go from the place of actually what can you do for yourself? How are you supported by your family, your friends, your community before we will intervene? Because people don't want social services in their lives. They would much prefer to have community provision where they know all those people in the local community centre or the library as an example. And the more that we can deliver services from those hubs, the less demand that we'll have on statutory provision. I think the rider that I would put on that is we always know historically as well that demand for social services goes through the roof. It does in family support in the education department as well when we see families in poverty, because that's when we see a significant impact. You'll have also heard on the news this week about the epidemic that we have in domestic violence against women. It is, but part of that is around financial issues. If we lose a football match, there's evidence to suggest that when men go home, they beat their wives and stuff. It's the same when in rugby. If there's a big event, we can correlate the data to show you when significant events in our communities have an impact on different services. So we're very cognizant of that, but we need to move things swifter. I think the other contribution that I wanted to make was yesterday we were notified of the Part 9 regulations, and that puts more responsibilities on us as a local authority. It was always we should do as part of that legislation. It is now we must do. And part of that is around early intervention and prevention, because early intervention and prevention is, we can have the statutory and the non-statutory debate, but essentially it is non-statutory early intervention and prevention. It is now a statutory provision and has been written into legislation. And that comes into effect later on in the year. So I think it's worth us all being cognizant of that. You've heard me promote early intervention and prevention at every opportunity. There's a reason. It costs us less money and it's better outcomes for our residents out there. But I'm sure Jackie would like to make a contribution as well, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, thank you for the question. So in response to that, as Councillor Gebby has just, it is a volatile budget area, and that's well documented both in scrutiny and throughout our processes, really. What we have done in social care over the last 12 months is that we've got 2 new practice models, one in children's, one in adults. We've got the 3-year plan in children's, and I presented in Scrutiny a couple of weeks ago our intention around the 3-year plan for adults. So the combination of all of those are set in our direction really, and are our transformational plans about trying to sustain the social services provision here in Bridgend. As you know, we've got a social services improvement board, and part of that board now we will be presenting our transformational plans as they develop. In addition to that, the service over the last 6 weeks have been working on a financial recovery plan, and that recovery plan will also go through the board and through the relevant processes really. We are a demand-led service, and and some of that is demand that comes with where we've got no control, like through the court process, for example. So we've still got all of those things in the mix really, but we are, we're ambitious really about our transformational plans that will make a difference to individuals, but also to the overall picture within social care. So our recovery plan looks at areas such as in the 5-point plan, so maximisation of grants, for instance. It's looking at high cost placements and doing deep dives at an individual level. It's our use of agency staff, again, that's something that's been well documented. We're now very clear about our exit plans, but we're also very clear about our pressure points in the system, and that we need to continue to be safe in areas. We've got a learning disability transformation plan, which is a high spending area within adult services, and we'll also invest in some time looking at the continuing healthcare process and how we do that. We're also in the process of looking at our transport and our responsibilities around transport, and that again will come through in terms of a policy. So every single area across adults, children's and prevention wellbeing is part of our financial recovery. At the moment, we're unable to put pounds against that recovery because we're trying to work some of that through. But if I can say that in terms of our workforce, they're very much aware of the financial system. Our mantra at the moment is every contact matters, but every penny counts as well, and that's something that's going through the whole of the workforce. So,
thank you. Does that answer the question for you, Councillor Penhill-Thomas?
Yeah. Thanks to both Jackie and Councillor Gabby for that. I just wanted to mention if Councillor Gabby hadn't mentioned intervention and early prevention and early intervention, I would have, because I think it needs to be seen through the context of potentially unintended consequences. I am one of the advocates of trying to look at things through a lens of statutory and non-statutory, but we need to be careful that we're not cutting our nose off to spite our faces, in so much as knowing the X cost of someone who's coming through early prevention intervention services versus somebody who wouldn't have that service because we scrap it and then come through the front door statutory services. So maybe there's a bit of work that we can do in the budget setting process, not too much hopefully, but knowing what the cost is, the value at that service, which is non-statutory, or some functions which are now statutory, as Councillor Gabby has mentioned, versus statutory, because we'll end up coming back here having a conversation saying, actually, we didn't intend for that. It's costing the council so much more because we've scrapped a non-statutory service. We don't want to be there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Just before you come in, Councillor Gabby, because I will bring you in, I have made a note about the Part 9 regulations that have changed, and I have noted, would it be possible for SOC2 members to have a briefing on that so that they are aware of what has changed there? Because I think that would help with this. But if you want to carry on.
Thank you very much. I was just going to offer to do a case study for the committee and send it round to you so that we can show you the cost avoidance stuff. Because early intervention, if we do it a child and an adult, if we do it from there, then it gives you a wider understanding of why we're doing what we're doing and why we promote early intervention at every opportunity. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you. I think we'd welcome that. Councillor Griffiths?
Thank you, Chair. I think I want to make an observation first, which is I think if I look over, I was looking at 3 areas here. Looking at care experienced children, homelessness, and some of the adult services as well. And what it appears to me is that over the last 10 years, we have stripped the services back to be the bare minimum to cope with the demand that was there at the time. And what we've actually seen now in the last 18 months is demand rise for all of those services, where previously we had spare capacity, we simply have no spare capacity now. And the consequence of that is that because we have no spare capacity, it means we have to go externally for providing those services. And that means going to commercial providers who make a lot of money. And therefore, we have to pay much higher sums per head, for example, for some of the services because we're going external. So I think that's a reasonable characterization of where we are. And what we're now trying to do is build a little bit of resilience back into the services so they can cope with the increased demand that's come from the last couple of years. So I guess my question here is about the resilience of the service and also the elasticity of the service, so that hopefully maybe in 3 or 4 years' time, when the economy's back on its feet again, some of these demands will come back down again. And so we should actually build in plans for scaling back down as well as scaling up now as we do those plans. And I just wanted to pick up one of those to start off with, which is on page 66. You've got the independent residential care budget. Now, I know, Deputy Leader, thank you for standing in for the officers today. Is that the area where you were targeting the investment around additional places?
So are you referring to the Regional Integration Fund, Councillor Griffiths? I'm assuming so, and yes, where we're targeting some of that. What I would say is that we're doing some of that work in adults as well. Okay. That we have a specific panel that looks at whether that's the best outcome for people. Is that what they really need? Especially during COVID, one of the things that we found with care packages was that we couldn't take people to day centres as an example. We couldn't take them out to the seaside and down the shopping and do all the sorts of things that we would normally do to keep them involved, engaged and active, because that increases their independence. We were putting in packages of care just to make sure that people were safe. But actually, that's an over-prescription. Yeah. But people got used to that, and there's also deconditioning happening, especially within our older population. The less they do, the more deconditioned they are, and the more that they're reliant on our services. So we are doing a massive piece of work around that in adults as well. It's not just about residential for children's. It's about how can we keep people out of residential homes in adults, in LD, can we keep them safely in their communities, engaged and happy. And I think that's one of the really important things. What we see is when we do all the early intervention and prevention and we keep people out of statutory services, they are much happier and they have better outcomes. And that's the right thing to do. So you've heard me say it previously, social services will always do the right thing. And if we always do the right thing, actually longer term, that will cost us less money. I hope that reassures you somewhat. But I'm sure there was a bit more of a technical question in there because Jackie's ready to answer you as well, Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you very much. So just to go back to the first part of your question, really, in terms of the financial recovery plan, we're looking at our rebalancing opportunities. And part of that, so where you said that by commissioning outside of the local authority, it's more expensive, that is a case in many areas, but also the opposite is true. So there are parts of our services we provide in-house that actually are more expensive than if we commissioned them through independent providers. So it's looking at the whole picture really, and also about our market stability. So part of the work that Councillor Gebbie talked about in terms of the business case for independent residential care in children's, that is predicated on us bringing people off the independent residential care and bringing them back in-house really. But in addition to that, we're looking, as I said earlier, in terms of all of our high-cost placements really, and that's across adults and children. We're doing a deep dive on all of those, looking at step-down opportunities, but doing that in a safe and a planned way. And part of our practice models is to ensure that we get better outcomes for people by doing that. So again, emphasising what Councillor Gebbie said. So we are looking at step-down opportunities. We're looking at building, increasing our provision in children's services, and then we're looking at maximising our in-house provision to ensure that we've got right care, right time, right place for individuals.
Thank you. all content with that, Councillor Griffiths?
Yeah, if I may link it back actually on page 63 on the Learning Disabilities Day opportunities. I think again a question for the Deputy Chair. Is that one of these examples which is this is a proactive service which keeps people happy without going into homes and that sort of thing? Just as an example, is that one of them?
It is indeed. With your, sorry, I just keep interrupting and I didn't wait for you to invite me, Chair. Yes, it is indeed. What I would say, it's not just those with LD, it's their carers as well, because that's important. These are unpaid carers. We need to ensure that we support them appropriately as well. Otherwise, that's an additional cost to us later on down the line when a carer gets to the point where they can't actually deliver the service to their loved one anymore. Thanks very much, Chair.
I've got one more question, which is further down, Chair. Would you like me to hold until later?
No, so can you hold it until later? I'm going to come
sure.
to Councillor Williams if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I had one more question on the education element, but in the pre-meet we discussed about the previous report and in a way this report as well coming to us. And after, I know you had meetings when we had a review of our scrutiny function, we were told to look at everything rather than give a deep dive into everything, to look at it from a more, I've forgotten the terminology I was going to use now, corporate point of view. But we are now we are sort of making deep dives with this report into each subject area. So whilst I would have a number of questions on each area and each line in this report, I'm going to just leave it with one other question, if possible, on education. And it links into our corporate risk as well, because of our potential plan of removing nursery education too. So it goes back to page 61. And there's the learner support element and the overspend. Now, whilst that has come down, the second bullet point there is about the increase in demand for additional learning needs. So as a governor in a school, I've seen that since COVID and that period where you had children who were not of nursery age going into school at that early age, but children who were at nursery age, missing the start of their schooling, we found that it's been a disadvantage to them as they've gone through the school. And also, there's been an increase in additional learning needs, as this report says, and behavioural problems as well. So I have a concern there that this budget is overspent now when we're looking at potentially implementing some of these further changes. But then the third part is talking about Ysgol Bryn Castell, and I know a number of schools are currently housing children who would be better suited in Ysgol Bryn Castell, but it's at capacity. And so you go above and there's additional support in schools now for these children who are being supported in mainstream schools when it's not perhaps the best setting for them. So until we've got that sorted, we're going to continue having to spend more money to put these children in other schools. So I wondered what we're going to do to ensure that we bring this down, because I have concerns going forward that this will only increase. And also the capacity at Ysgol Bryn Castell, because unless that is dealt with, we've discussed Herons Bridge, but not Ysgol Bryn Castell, because that is fantastic facility, and we need to ensure that we are using it and using the experience there so that we're not spending extra money on one-to-ones in mainstream schools, because that's going to cost us further. And I just wanted a little clarification on what we meant by inter-authority recoupment budget, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay, can I bring you in, please?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Williams. I'll cover the last point first. I remember when I first started in this job about 9 years ago, I asked exactly that question because I didn't know what recoupment meant either. So again, it doesn't really do what it says on the tin. Inter-county recoupment is essentially when children move out to county for special provision, and it works both ways, hence the recoupment element. So, for example, we might have learners from outside county that might benefit from provision within Bridgend, namely Herons Bridge in the main. So that's a really good question because it doesn't really say what it does. With regard to the other points, I think what we've seen in the narrative there is a significant increase in the number of learners that are requiring specialist support. Now, that could be specialist support in a classroom, in a resource space at the school, or in a specialist setting, for example, Heronsbridge or YBC. So we have seen a significant increase. At the same time, we have made significant savings within the MTFS with regard to CART. Now, this is the Communication Relationship Team, which supports children in the main with emotional, social and behavioural difficulties. So again, that's been a challenge. And also within the MTFS, members of this committee will note that we've made significant savings at the pupil referral unit. Again, this is a challenging situation. Councillor Williams is absolutely right. We're working at capacity in Ysgol Bryn Castell. Very recently, we undertook an external review of capacity at that setting, and they've provided us with an action plan going forward. So again, I'll be bringing that to scrutiny in due course. But again, that will look at ways that we can mitigate some of these pressures. We've also introduced a refined graduated response policy in schools, and that's supporting schools with additional support where required. And one of the things that head teachers have asked us to work on is a wider ALN strategy, and specifically around behaviour support. So again, that should be produced within autumn term. So hopefully all of these things will help. But Councillor Williams is absolutely right in one very, very important point here. We are seeing increasing demand with pupils with significant needs in some cases, and that is impacting obviously on schools and on the wider budget within the directorate. So it is a challenge, but hopefully, Chair, Councillor Williams, as I've indicated in my answer there are proactive steps we take in to mitigate some of these risks.
Thank you. Are you content with that, Councillor Williams?
I am, and it's no criticism of the directorate or schools, because the support is out there, but it comes at a significant cost, and we're looking at saving money here and bringing costs down, and paying for one-to-ones in certain settings is surely going to be more expensive than if we had a setting that everyone would fit into. But I look forward to seeing the review when it comes to scrutiny. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Griffiths, I'm going to come back to you very briefly.
I'm actually going to move on to the housing and homelessness. Is that okay for this point, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Okay, so I just wanted to pick out that £860,000 overspend predicted for this year. It's significantly larger than the previous years, and but I can see that that's from a complex set of interplay of lower grants and an MPFS requirement for an underspend. And I just wonder whether we need to have different plans in this area, because that's a big number to come down on that size of budget. So I wonder whether I could have a response maybe from the Chief Exec about how we get this back on track.
We've got Martin Morgans here in the chamber, so I'll take us to Martin instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Griffiths, in terms of the question. Yeah, it is quite challenging based on the condition in terms of priority. We've got a number of initiatives to bring that down in terms of that MTFS requirement. We're utilising Section 106 monies to procure houses of multiple occupation, which will see a reduction in the use of the tourism sector for single persons. The business cases average is costing us on average £85 per night per unit in the tourism sector. Will be costing us £25 per night per unit in our own HMO. I'm pleased to say we've acquired 2 HMOs, and we're further looking into the market, establishing some more. So that's going to be where the significant £400,000 is going to be brought back into. We've also offered the Welsh leasing scheme in terms out to the private rental sector. So we're looking to grow that scheme as well, which will see our numbers reduce in temporary accommodation. We're working really extensively hard with the RSLs in terms of rapid rehousing transitional plans. So that's taking these persons that are predominantly in the tourism sector in temporary accommodation out of that into more secure tenure, which is a key driver. The deficiency we got is stock, as you can imagine. But we've also expanded some of our schemes. Our alternative bed and breakfast was initiated in 2019. We had 12 units. We're currently sitting at 64 units. And again, this is, albeit it's utilising revenue cost, it's much cheaper than utilising the tourism sector in terms of Airbnbs and hotels. So that's the key driver. we're looking to initiate a scheme in a residency, the old Mapletree House, in terms of supporting individuals as well. So that'll be coming on live at the end of August this year, which we've done some significant work, and we've got a new provider going to be offering 24/7 support. So it's been a lot of action and activity be going in terms of reducing that challenging budget, albeit I'm touching wood and caveat, our numbers stay static in terms of presentations. We have circa around about 260 households in temporary accommodation, which is a slight drop from the heady heights of about 310 households. So as long as that stays where we are in stymied, we can reduce those numbers in terms of that. And then obviously working with RSLs and Welsh Government around transitional capital, we saw £4 million brought into into Bridgend, where we acquired around about 30 units, and the other sort of accommodation units then will reduce our temporary accommodation needs. So keenly working with RSLs again. Welsh Government pleased to announce that they offered a further £4 million in terms of transitional capital this year. So we're working hard now to attack those sort of difficult, accessible stroke larger homes where it's costing us significantly. So, you know, as a housing team, we're working quite substantially in terms of bringing those costs down.
If I may, Chair, thank you very much for that very complete answer, and that gives me a little bit of a more warmer feeling, I think. That seems very thorough. I just have one follow-up question, which is, would some additional capital be provided to you, would that help the situation resolve more quickly?
Not being too facetious here, yes would be the answer, Councillor Simon Griffiths, in terms of, you know, a lot of the challenges we have in housing. Capital is the key driver, and you know, ideally from a transitional capital perspective, £4 million again this year announced by Welsh Government for Bridgend, which is fantastic. But you know, I could double that, I could bring more units in, so that, you know, those 260 households we sitting there, I'm looking to, you know, counteract another 30 plus. So yes, it would, but that's the challenge we got across the organisation. And me as a sort of, where do we prioritise that cost basis?
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on a couple of questions that I've got as a result of what you've just said. So you've mentioned about the MTMF and the 106 monies, and we're using that for HMOs and working there to bring those figures down, etc., which is great for us as an authority. However, do we feel that we are hitting wellbeing and future generation targets and aspects there? Because I am aware that there are issues with HMOs locally, certainly to here, and the impact that has negatively on residents in the areas around them. Are we content that the two are marrying up here? Are we putting the authorities' needs first over and above the residents' needs, and is that correct to do so?
It's a difficult scenario, isn't it, Councillor Bledsoe, in terms of the HMOs, albeit, you know, the units that we'll be running them, you know, within those communities and addressing any issues if they arise. And got to be cognizant of it's a stepping stone. I don't see the HMOs as a long-term requirement, because ideally I want to get these persons into 10 years of accommodation that's not temporary, which HMO is temporary in its essence. So the key factor for me is I would like to see this as being a short-term, but it's a lot better set up than being in a hotel. They got access to multiple wash areas, kitchens, etc. We can start working with those persons in terms of financial management, etc. So that's a key, it's a step further for us, but totally cognizant of the impact of the community. And I can't legislate for how HMO private landlords run it. Obviously, from our perspective, we're going to be ensuring the community safe. And the numbers for Bridgend, we're looking at circa 4 units right now. But you know, cognizant of the fact that, you know, we are within communities and we want a cohesive community. So, you know, it's going to, you know, we'll be on each of our HMOs. There'll be a number that people can call if there's any issues, and we'll deal with them as they come up in terms of any antisocial behaviour, etc., if that occurs.
Thank you. And then obviously, we've touched on the PRS there as well, and you said that we are working with the PRS. Just as a broader overview, are we working, and actually I'm going to declare an interest, a personal interest, are we working with all PRS membership organisations in the sector? One that does spring to mind is the NRLA. You know, there are others. Are we working with those as well in order to tighten up the work that we're doing with PRS, or could we be doing more? Thank you.
We've identified we need to reignite our private landlords forum, which hasn't been going recently. So that's one of our key actions. And yeah, I agree with you. We need to be working with these organisations because ideally I want to attract the private rental sector into our leasing scheme. But as you know, there's a differential in terms of the local housing allowance versus what the private sector can offer. So we've got a call out to all landlords we're happy to work with, understanding that longevity in terms of working with us from our relationship is good for them, but it's very challenging from the private rental versus the local housing allowance in terms of that, them wanting to come into the marketplace. But, you know, the offer's there in terms of we take away all the issues around maintenance, ongoing management, etc., and nominations, which, you know, puts my housing team under quite significant pressure as being a non-stockholder, which, you know, there's a slight irony to it in terms of that. But, you know, we're happy to take on that challenge because we want to challenge the temporary accommodation issues we have.
Thank you. And Councillor Thomas, I can see your hands up. I will bring you in after this because you've just brought me neatly onto my final question, which is about RSLs. And obviously we don't have any stock here, which is a challenge for us. However, are we content that the RSLs that we work with here are doing all that could be done to help residents in the locality? And if not, is there anything that we can do to help them to improve for our residents' outcomes? Thank you.
In terms of our RSL stock, we got 9,425 units across the borough. That was outlined in our prospectus. Obviously, V2C is our key RSL with just under 6,000 units. Harvard and Wales of West are the next ones, about 1.2, 1.3 circa. We've been the last year aggressively working with all RSLs. I have to be honest, working with Caris as well. We set up a monthly meeting in terms of that. I'm driving new schemes opportunities with each of them. We're working closely with our planning colleagues, so in Janine's team, in terms of doing a pre-app to the pre-app to ensure that there's opportunities here. I'm pushing the RSLs really hard. That's the benefit of the £4 million worth of transitional capital that came into the RSLs. That's really pushing hard based on what need and demand is there. I'm happy to say that we've got RSLs really interested in coming into the area. So outside of core, so coastal's got a real significant interest in Bridgend. And there's obviously with the new LDP, there's opportunities for them with the private sector to link up, not just coastal but others. But no, we are working really hard. We've got a really active group now, the RSLs, and we've been really brutally honest in terms of the challenges. If you look at the Common Housing Register, predominantly single person. RSLs don't like single person, but it's something we need to address, and that's what's really caused us to go down the HMO route really, because the RSLs weren't picking that demand. That's something I'm working with them, how we can address that in terms of that multiple occupancy within the RSL tenure. So it's challenging, but I think it's really quite effective at the moment in terms of where we are in terms of that position statement.
Thank you. Did you want to come in on that at all, Janine? No, you're okay. Right. Yeah, no worries. That's fine. Councillor Tim Thomas, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. But I'm having a few technical problems. My hand keeps going up and down, and it's going down. It's a bit retrospective now, but I just wanted to declare a personal interest for this item because I do work quite closely with, I represent letting agents, basically. An organisation that does.
Yeah. Did you want to make any comment on it or no?
I'd rather not, given the closeness of my employment.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. Lovely. Okay, and with that, I can't see any other hands up. So I will proceed to the next item on the agenda, as all invitees have also been invited for that report, so I'd invite you to stay. Item 7, Q4 year-end performance. I will ask the officer to briefly introduce the report. I will call upon the members to indicate they wish to speak by clicking on the raised hand button in turn. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask that there have been a few requests for a short comfort break, if that would be possible?
That's fine, and I think this would be an ideal opportunity to take one now until about 10 past, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you.